Hi, I'm John Patrick Morgan, and I'm about to share with you how to create what you want in a service context when you're being served. So, a little story. I was coaching a client the other day, and he's a doctor, retired doctor, and he was sharing about having recently gone through a process at another doctor's office for something for himself. And he was explaining how he was frustrated with the entire experience, that he feels almost like he's walked into and isn't really exactly what he wants, and he doesn't like the way the service is being provided and from the get-go. And even more than that, he was just frustrated that he's kind of gotten himself in this situation now where he's quite far along down this path with this doctor and their office and this process, and it not being exactly what he wanted, and frustrated that he didn't say anything. And so, why didn't you say anything? And it wasn't space for it. One thing led to another. First, there was the email, and then the sign this thing, and then you go in, and then they're doing this, and just kind of you get moved through this process from one stage to the next. And they're just, in the conversation, there just wasn't space for me to ask for what I wanted. Not so much about asking or saying that, just there wasn't space to talk about how this whole service and experience could be different, could be better from his experience as a doctor. And as I'm listening to him tell me about the lack of space to talk about what he could see, it becomes really clear that the frustration is not about that thing that's happening out there. It's about this thing that that's possible inside, and it not being expressed. You holding back from speaking your truth is painful. It hurts. And we experience that as frustration, but it's more like a secondary gain on top of the hurt of not being able to have what we want because we're not expressing what we want. So we're really kind of frustrated with ourselves when this occurs. I'm sure you can relate. I've been there just like him, and I'm sure you have as well. And so what we were looking at is this experience where in order to have the conversation that he wanted to have about how the service could be different and how this process wasn't working for him, he would need to basically interrupt, because there was not a point where they asked him what he thought. He would need to interrupt them. And, the idea of needing to interrupt is really telling. I have this stance that if you're feeling like you want to interrupt or need to interrupt to get what you want, and you're not doing it, that you're actually wise for not doing it. There is wisdom in fear. I have the position that fear is always true. And what I mean by that is that if we're afraid of something, then that means with the way that we're experiencing reality, with the way we're seeing things and conceptualizing it and giving it meaning, the feeling of fear is the correct response. We should be afraid when we see things the way that we do that produces fear. So it's a perfect system. There's nothing wrong with that. And so my interest really is not about how I can overcome this fear, because look, if you feel like to say something would be interrupting, and then you feel a little bit of cultural anxiety, because it's just what we've learned. It's like interrupting isn't nice, isn't kind, so I'm a little bit afraid. You can either engage with that fear through the flight response of avoiding interrupting and just going along with the flow of things, that the way things are happening, just going along with it. Or you can go into the fight response to fear, which looks like feel the fear and do it anyway. Like you're afraid, but just doesn't matter. Power through it. Have some courage. Bite the bullet. And, sure, yeah, you can do that. You can get results that way, but the quality of the experience is not as fulfilling and as peaceful as it could be. And the reason is because overpowering the fear actually says that the fear is true to be there. I'm just going to fight it. And so I'm much more interested in fearlessness, how I can be free from fear so that I can actually take action to produce a result that's not avoiding fear and not overcoming fear. And so for me, in this instance, it's a really good example of how the conceptualization creates the context that makes the fear possible. The idea that in order for me to speak what I want, when this freight train of service is running the way it always runs, in the way it's running, at the pace that it's running, would be for me to interrupt, which means to rupture, to break. That feels uncomfortable because it's not a nice thing to break what somebody's got going on, right? So we're conceptualizing this as an interruption. That is what creates the context for the fear. That's why we're afraid, because we know it's not a nice thing to do. So I like to, in this type of situation, if I notice I'm afraid of interrupting, it's like, well, how about I just don't interrupt? And then doesn't mean avoid interrupting. That means let me come at this a different way. How else can I conceptualize this to give rise to a totally different experience? And I prefer the concept of intervention over interruption. Interruption is to break something, and to intervene is to come between two things. So two things are everything up to the moment that I spoke and everything after the moment that I spoke. If I didn't speak anything, somebody's on a freight train of service and information, they're just going to keep going. And if I can jump in between what they've done and what they're about to do, and I can come in with something that I have to offer, to me, that's not breaking. The intervention is about bringing something to bear, adding in. It's like dancing. When you're in a dance and with another person, you bring your foot forward. That's an intervention of your potential, of your spirit, of your possibility, of your love. Intervention is an expression and an act of love, whereas interruption is an expression, an act of fear as a possibility. I'm not preaching truth here. I'm sharing a way of representing reality that creates experience. That's all I'm ever doing, really. So to intervene, to me, is an expression and an act of love. It's like when I think about making love with my wife and bringing children into the world, to me, that's an intervention. I'm intervening into her being, and together we create. This is what life is all about. It's our conversation is a mimetic sexing. It's a creation. And so to intervene from my heart, from love, is dancing with somebody. It's saying, hey, with everything that you're doing in this freight train of service, I see a possibility to create something even more beautiful. So let me bring that. And I can do that at any moment, in the middle of somebody's service, in the middle of somebody's speaking, in the middle of a sentence. There's no piece of me that's afraid to bring love. And there's no piece of anybody that's afraid to bring love, because when you know in your heart that you're loving, you just move, you just go straight in. Nothing stops love. Nothing inside us stops love. When we're connected to it, it moves freely. And then you don't need to think about, well, how do I do it so that it's an intervention? No, when you're connected to this as an expression of possibility and a chance to make something greater, you know enough about how to do that in a way that works. And the most important thing is where you're coming from will be felt. And look, this is a great distinction. If you can start to think about intervening in place of interrupting, you'll create more freedom for you to speak and to create more beautifully. You'll create fearlessness simply by changing the context through how you conceptualize reality. And that's like the basic level. That's the level that I'm communicating with you at with the content of this video. But what I want to point out with both this video and pretty much every video that I make, I'm actually doing two things simultaneously, at least. One is I'm giving you the content of a distinction. But the other thing that I'm doing or trying to do here in these videos, and with this one especially, is to communicate to you a certain way of thinking about yourself and your life. And that is that everything that I'm experiencing and that I think that I need to overcome is actually being created by me. And more specifically, not just because I'm the one that's creating my reality as a concept, but I'm actually creating it through how I conceptualize. So how I think about what I'm doing, how I think about what's happening, is actually what creates the foundation or the soil from which my experience is born. And so there's beautiful work to be done to overcome traumas and patterning, and I speak a lot about that give rise to fear. But you don't need to spend that much time all the time working on creating freedom and fearlessness. Sometimes it's as easy as thinking about, how am I thinking about this, that creates even the possibility for fear. So much freedom can be created by actually experiencing life differently, through seeing it differently, through conceptualizing it differently. So pay attention to the language that you use. Pay attention to the subtext of a language, to what it means, and to what possibility it generates through your speaking it or thinking it. And then think to yourself, wow, what if I actually came at this a totally different way of seeing? What might I feel? And if I felt that, what might actions or activities might I have access to more easily without having to overcome any fears at all? So if this way of thinking and creating your life and your experience and your results is interesting to you, then I would love to teach you more about this. And the best place for us to do that, for me to do that with you, is in Creating School. So you can go to creating.school and read about it. It's a little bit of money every month, but there's loads of content there with lessons. And I also do live classes every month. We play games in our little online Facebook community. Growth games we're called. There's engagement. There's personal support from me from time to time, depending on how you're engaged and what kind of questions you ask. But anyway, click the link, Creating School, check it out, and join. If you have any questions, you want to talk to me about it before joining, reach out to me personally. If I have time, I'm happy to jump on a call with you. Anyway, if you watch this entire video, it's 10 minutes. You're awesome. I love you. Much love. Bye for now.